You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Hey guys, welcome to the Choose FI radio podcast. Today we're going to be talking about mindfulness. Brad and I have been aware for a while now, at least the last 6 to 12 months, and we've even tried to touch on it on the show, that financial independence is about so much more than money. We're seeing this theme really around the world. Major tech corporations like Google, Facebook, other Silicon tech giants all have latched onto this concept and are trying to get their employees to start incorporating it into their daily practice. Even the military, Navy SEALs, are incorporating some form of mindfulness practice into their daily routines. And it goes to the fact that you don't know what you don't know until you do, and there might be something here that's worth exploring. And we thought to help us with this, we would bring on someone inside the FI community, someone that has a very unique FI story to tell, but then can adapt that with his own experiences to talk specifically about mindfulness and have a story that so perfectly goes down both of those lanes. And there was one very obvious choice for this, and it's Cory Muscara, who actually teaches mindfulness at the University of Pennsylvania and runs the Long Island Center of Mindfulness. This is someone that was actually introduced to me by my co-host Brad, who had actually done a retreat almost up to a year ago and was just blown away by Cory's message, what he had to say, and just his simple approach to this path. And so to help me with this interview, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I'm doing well. This is going to be a fun one for me. I met Cory, like you said, about a year ago at Dominic Quartuccio's retreat that I went to, and we mentioned on episode 33 when we had Dom on. And yeah, Cory and I became instant fast friends. We had so much in common, not least of which he's from Long Island also. So this is our third guest from Long Island, which is kind of crazy. But I realized fairly quickly that Cory was a member of the FI community. And it was wild because I was telling him about this podcast that I was just starting. At that point, Choose FI was in its infancy. And he's like, oh, you mean like Mr. Money Mustache, right? I read all those articles, and went on, and we just talked for a couple hours, and it was fantastic. So yeah, Cory was one of the instructors at Dom's retreat, and he was speaking about mindfulness. So this is the perfect segue into teaching our audience about this, because we constantly talk about financial independence as a life optimization strategy and as part of this overall superpower. And I believe that mindfulness has a significant part in that superpower. So with that, Cory, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. It's a pleasure to be here. Big fan of your work.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a fun ride. And it's interesting to me to think about the fact that you found, I guess, Choose FI through that introduction. And I believe you've been kind of following it up to this point. You've been coming right along with us for this journey. It seems like it's the perfect time to now circle back and introduce our audience to your story, because really, there is way more here than anybody could have possibly expected when they decided to listen to the show today. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Thanks, man. I'm excited to dive in.
So, Cory, I was just trying to figure out how to get this thing started, and I'd love to hear more about your backstory. Just to kind of set the stage, I know that currently you teach mindfulness at the University of Pennsylvania, and you also run the Long Island Center for Mindfulness. Clearly, this is a huge part of your life, but I would love to just dial it back a little bit, take a step back, and for our audience, how did you stumble onto this concept of mindfulness? Where did this all start from?
Yeah, it started in a different place than I think many people get into mindfulness. One of my identities would be as a mindfulness meditation teacher. When I used to think of meditation teachers or what it meant to be a meditation teacher, I had lots of ideas around that. Specifically, those people must be kind of hippies or very spiritual or disconnected or out there. Or maybe they got into meditation because they were really stressed out. My path was a little different. I got into meditation because I was trying to impress a girl. I had a hippie girlfriend in college. She was into meditation. And I thought if I meditate, she would think I was cooler. So there was no noble undertaking behind all of this. But I did have a very type A, passionate personality. And when I say I want to try something, I usually dive in 100%. So I made a New Year's resolution. I said, I'm going to try this thing out. I'm going to do 15 minutes a day, 3 times a week. I was 19 when I began. I had very restless sleep. I was waking up 20, 30 times a night. Started meditating within 3 weeks, was only waking up 2 to 3 times a night. I was going to class. I wanted to be present and focused in class, but my mind was all over the place. Say within about 4 weeks of meditating, there was just this new capacity to focus and be more grounded at will. And I also found that out of nowhere, I just started to feel better. Not radically better, not like the clouds parted and all my problems went away, but I'd be walking around campus and out of nowhere, I would just start feeling good. And there'd be a subtle smile on my face. And of all the things, that piqued my interest the most because nothing had changed in my life. Even at that point, you could argue there were more stressors. I was confused about what I was going to do with my life. Now I was single, I didn't have a girlfriend. There was just the basic stuff of, in college, at that point, it seemed like they were real stressors, but just what am I trying to do with my life and balancing work and friends and all that stuff. And yet I was starting to feel better from the inside out. And so I got curious, like, what is going on with this meditation thing that could cultivate that within myself? But I was an economics major. So as you can imagine, no one in the economics department was talking about meditation. So I didn't really come out of the closet for some time. And the turning point for that actually came with this trip that we took to New York Stock Exchange. About 30 of us in my class at the econ department. Each year we take this big trip to New York Stock Exchange, meet with some big wig. And this year we were to meet with this multi-billionaire hedge fund manager. Everyone said, this is the guy you want to meet. This is where you want to get in your life. This is who you want to learn from. So we were all excited naturally. And I was like, all right, maybe this guy will rekindle some of my enthusiasm for the finance world. We go there, guy gives a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation, and it just sucked my soul right out of my body. And I said, I don't know exactly what I want to do with my life, but I know for damn sure I do not want to end up like that guy. To be fair to him, I am not saying he's a miserable person. He might have just had a prostate exam. Like, his life could be great. And I'm not saying all people in finance are miserable, because I know obviously a lot of people in that world that are very content. But for the first time, and the reason I share this story is, like, for the first time, I actually started asking myself, if that's not what I want, then what is it that I want? Every response to that inquiry could have been reduced to, I am trying to be happier. I want to be more fulfilled. That wasn't the first thing that was coming up. The first responses were like, I want to make X amount of money. And then I'd break that down. Why do I want that? Well, then, I'll be more, I could go on more vacations and I'll be more relaxed and that'll make me happier. Or I want to be in this relationship and that'll bring greater connection and then I'll be happier. I want kids and there'll be more meaning in my life and that'll make me happier. So I started to see, fortunately at a young age, at 19, that was really at the heart of all of these different pursuits. But the way I was going about that up until that point was in trying to piece together all these different puzzle pieces of my life, right? If that makes sense as an analogy, like the puzzle piece of my social life, family, what I'm going to do professionally, relationships, all this different stuff. And trying to piece that together in such a way that when the puzzle pieces come together and the picture looks good, then I'll be happy. The issue with this is rarely do those puzzle pieces come together exactly as we want them to. What we're even learning in psychology now is that even when they do, the euphoria or the bliss or the hedonia that you feel from that is we habituate to it. And eventually we need more and more and more. And so my driving question then became, what is the possibility? What is the potential to cultivate a well-being, a contentment that is not so derived from external variables? It wasn't a FI intention at that point, but it was hugely aligned with the FI intention. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that became the driving force. And when I graduated college, I had done a bunch of mindfulness trainings before, but I took my type A personality right into that. And I said, I've been meditating 15 minutes a day. It's going really well. What would happen if I meditated 15 hours a day for 6 months straight and didn't talk to anyone? And so that's what I did. I went over to Burma, became a monk for a chunk of time, about 6.5 months. The big intention of that was I wanted to sever myself from the things in my life that were bringing me comfort, joy, happiness at that point, and see what is the possibility of cultivating an inner well-being that is not solely derived from external variables.
Okay, we just have to stop right there because someone's going to go press the 10 seconds back button because they were not expecting you to say that you stopped doing what you were doing and went to Burma and became a monk.
Yes.
I think we need to highlight that and slow down just a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure.
No one expected that sentence to finish that way.
Yeah, so it wasn't my intention to become a monk. I went over to the monastery just thinking I was going to do a bunch of meditation. I found out that you can do these temporary ordinations where you don't have to ordain as a monk for life, but for a chunk of time, you can take the same vows that a monk would. And those are things like you're completely celibate. You have to renounce a lot of your belongings. You can't touch money. You can own very small things like a toothbrush, toothpaste, your monk robes. You have to shave your head. And so that really called to me on one level because it was like, oh, wow, now I'm really getting away from worldly possessions and truly just being with myself and my mind. And I liked the idea of seeing what can happen in that space. So that's how that happened. And then, that was 2 weeks into my retreat there that I ordained as a monk.
Do you have this moment where you're sitting up maybe a week or two into this and you're like, what the heck am I doing here?
Yeah, you mean at the monastery?
Yeah, at the monastery.
In Burma.
In Burma.
Not even at night. It was like every hour, at least 30 minutes of every hour of every day was devoted to that reflection. And I was going to leave actually after 6 days, which was interesting because I wrote a whole blog post that I posted all over social media to my friends and everything about like why I was going away for 6 months, what I thought I was going to get out of it. It was like this noble pursuit, but I was getting like a lot of accolades and praise and people like, yeah, go Cory, this is awesome. And I felt good about myself. And then 6 days into the retreat, I was planning to leave. The reason was that it was just so much more difficult and painful than I anticipated. All the unusual things aside that I wasn't used to, just the austerity of meditating 14 hours a day, eating 2 very small meals at 5:30 a.m. and 10:30 a.m., sleeping on a mattress that's so thin you could squeeze it between your fingers and feel the bones in your fingers. I mean, it was, from what I was used to up until that point, a very abrupt transition. And I developed a tremendous amount of physical pain in my body, a lot of loneliness, a lot of just, what the heck am I doing? I'm 22 years old. This doesn't make sense. What does this have to do with happiness? What I found very quickly is anytime I'd sit down and I would meditate, the physical pain would come up in my body. The pain would be accompanied by something else, and that was a story. And the story was, there's no way you could do this for 6 months. Why are you here? This is stupid. What's wrong with your body? Why are you in so much pain? Nobody else looks like they're struggling that much. And then when those thoughts would arise, they would trigger emotions of anger, frustration, loneliness, despair, fear. And then when those emotions would get triggered, the physical pain would get even worse. So I saw that I was actually fueling the intensity of the suffering of the pain just by the narrative going on through my head. And by learning how to actually work with those thoughts, not taking them so seriously, being able to watch them like clouds coming and going, passing away, I found that I was actually able to mitigate how much suffering there was, how much pain there was, because so much of the pain was coming from the frustration around it and the anger around it. And then what would happen is I'd be able to sit with the pain in my body and still be in a deep place of groundedness, peace, contentment. I found that to be one of the biggest lessons for me just in those first 6 days, because now in my life, it was just, that was just pointing to the reality of being a human being, that there are inevitably going to be these pains that arise, whether they're physical, emotional, loss of a loved one, things not going exactly as you want them to go. But the story that we layer on top of that, which is like, why me? Why did God do this to me? How am I going to be able to go on? No one's ever going to love me again. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm always going to fail. That actually creates a more intense layer of suffering that can impede this deeper quality of contentment and happiness that we're often looking for. So that was within the first week. And that was the thing that actually, seeing that clearly was the thing that actually allowed me to continue for the full 6 months and make it through. And then by the last 2 months, I was able to sit in a room by myself, which was about the size of a prison cell, in the dark, 100 degrees, not talking to anyone all day and meditating 20 hours a day. And I had never been more happy, content, fulfilled in my entire life, which there's no science to suggest that should be possible.
Cory, that's incredible. I'm just so curious about that day 6. How close were you to leaving? Talk us through what was going on in your head and what eventually clicked that you decided to not leave. I know you alluded to it a minute ago, but I'm curious, was there a defining point where you said, you know what, I can do this?
Yeah, it was this ebb and flow, like a contraction and release that was happening up into those 6 days, meaning there were some points where I was like, all right, I could do this. I'm really into this. And then other points where my mind would just feel, it was almost like claustrophobia, where you're just stuck and all you want to do is just get out. And so that would happen. There would be the intensity of that, and then it would ease. And that went on for about 6 days. And then on the 6th day, the morning of the 6th day, this was before breakfast, I remember, we start meditating at 3 a.m. So you wake up at 3, you're doing about 2.5 hours of meditation before breakfast, which is at 5:30. It was probably the second meditation around 4:30. And I was sitting there and I was planning to go to the main office at the monastery that afternoon to just talk about what options there were to leave. I was either going to try and go to a different monastery in Burma, one that was maybe less intense. I was going to go to maybe this monastery in France called Plum Village with Thich Nhat Hanh, who's notoriously a lot more gentle, or I was just going to go home. As I was navigating that thought process, one thing I neglected to mention early on is that a big impetus for me wanting to go there was I did want to expose myself to something that was a lot more difficult. I wanted to see, could I go through something? Could I manufacture on some level, some degree of pain, suffering that was more intense than what I was used to, and then find a contentment within that? Because I had felt I lived a mostly privileged lifestyle up until that point, and I knew at some point in my life the proverbial stuff would hit the proverbial fan. And I wanted to sort of just build up an insurance around that, see how I could handle that. And so that came back to me in that moment. It was like, oh, isn't this interesting? You came here to experience some degree of pain, suffering, and now it's here. And now that it's here, all you want to do is leave. How do you expect to work with real difficulty in your life if you can't even do it here? And how do you expect to maybe help other people go through this if you can't even do it yourself, especially in a safe place like a monastic setting? This is not like coming back from war or dealing with some of the other traumas and tragedies people go through. So I hate to say that shame or guilt was the thing that gave me the kick in the butt, but it kind of was. It was the thing that said, dude, you came here for something. This is the something. Let's actually do the work to see how we can get through it.
Was there a point where you felt like, I've got this, I'm on cruise control? Or was it pulling fingernails? Was there a place at which you became content with your thoughts?
Yes, there was. And I don't want to ever make the promise around mindfulness or even my path that there was a point where it clicked and then I hit cruise control and then everything has just been smooth and gravy from there on out. That was my romantic idea going into the retreat, that I was going to cultivate some big insight and I was going to take that back with me and I would just be able to do, smooth sailing from here on out. Everything else in my life, it would just be gravy, but I would have my pure nugget of internal happiness. To some degree, that has been certainly the case. There has been this deeply developed wellspring of contentment that was not there by any measure before. But as I was going through the retreat, a lot of it was just oh, I'm really getting it. Wow, I can notice my thoughts coming and going and not take them so seriously. And then the next day, I'm just thinking about cheeseburgers and, why did Mufasa die in The Lion King? And then my mind's going all over the place. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? You're terrible at this. You've been here for 3 months. You're so bad at meditation, everyone else. And it would just go in that ruminative cycle. And so much of what came out of the deeper insight, the deeper wisdom that came out of this experience was just watching that volatility of mind, just watching oh, there are days where it's easy and there are days where it's tough. And eventually what happened is my mind just said, just go with the flow, man. Just trust the process. It's never going to be exactly as you want it to be. So when the good moments are there, enjoy them, but don't hold on to them so tightly. And when the bad moments are there, right, you don't have to like them, but notice how much you're resisting and how much extra tension and suffering that's causing. When my mind got to that space, that's when things became a lot easier. And that's where this cruise control started to happen, but not in the way people would typically think. Because it's not like everything just became good. There was still pain. There was still volatility and emotions and thoughts all over the place. But my relationship to all of that had shifted, and there was a much deeper groundedness where I was able to watch all of that happening without being swept away by that, if that makes sense.
But the cool thing is, time does march on, regardless of your state of mind or this new sense of empowerment and control you have over your thoughts. You come to the end of this 6-month stint where you've totally clawed yourself outside the system and now you thrust yourself back in. What does that transition back look like? How does your framework look different now?
Yeah. Of the questions I get about me going to Burma, that is the one that comes up the most. Like, what was it like to come back? People want to know what it was like to come back more than they want to know what it was like to go in. The first couple weeks back were surprisingly easy. I went 6 months. It was a silent retreat. I was talking once every few days for a couple of minutes. And then I came back and I was on the phone like 5 hours a day, talking to friends, talking to family, recapping them, the influx of television, social media, all of these things. But my mind was in such a balanced place that I was able to just like move fluidly with all of it, which was really cool. But after a few weeks, some of the deeper concentration that came from just meditating like 18 hours a day, it started to wear off. And also the realities of, all right, man, like you're not in a monastery anymore, right? No one's cooking food for you anymore. You don't have to not worry about anything anymore. You got to put your clothes on in the day. You're not wearing your robes. And you got to figure out, like, how are you actually going to make a living and provide for yourself? Despite the austerity and the intensity of that monastic setting, there is a simplicity to it, an ease to it that you can settle into after a period of time. And the real world, right, where there's relationships, things, all of that can be incredibly more complicated. So that was actually a tough integration because I am a very intense personality and a very all or nothing personality, which is why it's easy for me to go into something and that requires, just do this 14 hours a day. Cool, I'll do that. That's the structure. But then it's coming out, it's like, I don't even know if I have a half an hour a day to meditate. And what is the life I'm trying to structure around my practice, what I know to be important? How do I manage money amidst all of this? I would say it was probably 6 months after I got back from Burma. A friend of mine sent me a link to a blog and he said, I think you should check this out. This really aligns with a lot of the conversations we've had around like what some of your experiences in Burma were like and what they taught you. And I think just from a financial perspective, you're going to love this. And it was Mr. Money Mustache, his blog. So from that point, I think I spent like the next year like really diving. Well, actually, in a couple of weeks, I went through like all of his blog posts and then many of them twice. I loved the perspective around choosing the FI lifestyle as a way to find happiness, looking at your relationship to money and things and how you're structuring your life as a way to find happiness and as a way to find joy. And rather than minimalism or frugality, this thing that we have to suffer through or this renunciation, to actually see the bliss in that, because that's what I had touched into so deeply, that having less things actually lent itself to this freedom of mind, this spaciousness of mind. And I was trying to figure out how to deepen that in relationship to a world of things. So that was my first entry point into the FI world and starting to build that connection between that experience, going deep into mindfulness, and what the FI lifestyle could look like.
Cory, I loved how in that you managed to work Choose FI. Thank you for that subtle plug.
Yes, you're very welcome. It was an organic awakening to that experience. So you can thank the practice and you can thank Mr. Money Mustache.
Yeah, it's incredible that you, just figuring out the timeline of your life, that you found Mr. Money Mustache probably at least 4 years ago, right? So, I mean, fairly early on in the life of his blog, actually. So you've been a member of the FI community for years now.
Yeah, I got in with Mr. Money Mustache before he was like really Mr. Money Mustache. And it was through, I'd probably say in the year that I really started diving deeply into his stuff, he just exploded. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Cory, you're basically 24 years old at this point, approximately, plus or minus. You're back from Burma. You're back from a 6-month silent meditation retreat. What does life actually look like for you? So you're reintegrating into American society. How did you earn money? You live on Long Island, which is a high cost of living area. How did you, A, just follow any type of occupational path, and B, like, how did you follow the FI path while doing that?
Yeah. Well, so I was fortunate enough that my parents did let me stay at home for a chunk of time. So I was able to save some overhead by living at home. There were a few things, a few realities, big realities that I was faced with. The first of which is I had about $50,000 worth of college debt, soon to take on another $60,000 by going to graduate school. So that was something heavy on my mind and a reality that I needed to face. And then I didn't have anything to bring in some source of income. And I knew I wanted to teach. I knew I had sort of an entrepreneurial spirit and I could build something. But the first way it developed, I came back after 4,000 hours worth of meditation and like sitting very extensively. I had some pain and discomfort in my back, my spine. So I went to a chiropractor and I was telling the lady at the front desk about the experience. And like, keep in mind, I'm off of like 6 months of deep concentration, meditation, mindfulness, like opening my heart. I was in this beautiful space. I was walking around like I was on clouds. And I'm in the waiting room and there's this gentleman sitting there. And I sit down next to him, waiting for my adjustment. And he leans over to me and he's like, "Hey, man, I just heard you talking to the secretary about your time as a monk. I just got back from my therapist. And my therapist said, aside from you meeting a monk, I don't know what I can do to help you. I think you're my monk." Things like that don't often happen to me because that sounds like some story that somebody would sell you. And it just sounds too strange to be true. But it was. And that was my first student, John. And I said, I don't teach right now, but if you want to explore developing that, we can. And he brought one of his buddies and we started out. I had this small space, social worker's office, and we just met once a week. It was 2 guys, a lot of anxiety, and one with anxiety, one with depression. We started doing these practices, and they started doing a meditation practice about 15 minutes a day. And in a short period of time, noticed these really significant shifts in their life around just their quality of life, their well-being. And then they started telling their friends, and they wanted to be taught, and it just built from there and then expanded to the point where I could actually make an income doing this. And then once I did that, then everything first, and I owe this really to Mr. Money Mustache, just everything got funneled into my debt. I delayed moving out of my house just because I wanted to put every single cent into getting rid of that, and was able to tackle it within about 2.5 years, both the college debt and the graduate school debt. But it was a commitment. But I enjoyed it. Like, I really enjoyed just seeing, like, can I tackle this big number, do something that everyone says is going to take me 15, 20 years to get down to zero? Can I do it in a fraction of that?
Jonathan, I think you can relate to that, right?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And I wonder, do you feel like it's almost like a built-in competitive edge for financial independence? Because when you become dependent on less or you need less to be happy, everything goes farther.
100%. Yes. And this is one of my big plugs for the intersection of mindfulness and FI. The more content you can become by just being yourself, by sitting down and just being with your breath, the more that from the inside out develops a sense of fulfillment, happiness, and well-being, then everything else in your life is just gravy. But you no longer need it. And you can watch your mind organically shift its relationship to the external world, where things that once pulled you almost seem like a form of enslavement. And it's not like you actively resist, oh, I can't let myself have that. You don't want it because you know the burden of having another thing. And the fulfillment is coming from right here. So it's like your cup is already full. You don't need anything else to put in. And that's more of an absolute version because, of course, we do need some degree of comfort in our external life. And being in relationships is great, and having kids is great, and having a nice home is great, and certain things that we have a high return on investment for us. All of that is well and good. But I am passionately interested in how much can I just develop that fulfillment independent of the variables. And then it's like a superpower, especially when it comes to this, because like all those things that you might be putting your money toward, they just don't matter as much. And you can be just as happy in the process by devoting your money to where it's most important, whether it's just building up your nest egg or paying off debt or wherever you feel like you want to put it.
Cory, does that fulfillment come from just an essence of being? Or, talk me through your own sense of fulfillment. What lights you up? What do you get value out of from your life? I don't mean to ask a stupid or naive question here, but is it just that contentment of being, or are there other goals, plans? Like, does that all factor into it? I guess just talk me through that.
Sure. Yeah, not a stupid question at all. And it's important to get granular with this stuff because you do get a lot of teachers that just speak about, it's all about being and just do more being and less doing and just be fulfilled from the inside out. And
Nike is going to strike this from the record. They are not going to allow us to air anything that says you need to just do it, man.
Just do it. It's just not that easy. And it's something like the idea of cultivating this contentment from the inside out, it sounds very alluring, especially philosophically, but like, how do we actually do it? And so I'll kind of walk you through how it's unfolded for me. And I'm not 100% sure how this actually happens, but I think for a lot of people, one of the first things that goes down, or when I first started doing the meditation, I would sit down and then like for like the first minute, I was like, oh, I could totally do this. And then like a minute later, I'd be like, ooh, I want to go on Facebook. Or a minute after that, I was like, ooh, I want a cookie right now. Or a minute after that, I was like, ooh, I should text this person. And all of these things could just be seen as like thoughts going through the mind or different impulses that arise. But those impulses, that volition to do something else, is one way that the mind is saying this moment is not good enough, that we need to shift this moment in some way, that you just being here by yourself needs to be improved, or we need to layer something else on it, or you need to talk to someone, go on social media, buy this thing in order to make this moment okay. And so in the beginning, you're working with a lot of that. You're working with just the agitation in the body, the volition to do something else, to get someplace else, to move away from that agitation. And over time, what happens is, one, the nervous system naturally settles into that space. And if you're doing a basic meditation where maybe you're just focusing on the breath, the way you're going throughout that process is you're anchoring your attention on the breath. You're noticing the mind when it wanders off and it goes like, I want a cookie right now, or I really want to scroll through my newsfeed, or I wonder if that person texted me back. And you just watch that. In the beginning, it has a huge grip on you and you're like, no, I have to listen to it. And often you do, but you get better at saying, all right, just a thought. Can I just come back to the breath? And it's these very small moments that don't feel like much as it's happening, but it's a lot over time. These small moments of letting go, like feeling that pull and then softening around it, coming back to the breath. Feeling the pull again, softening around it, coming back to the breath. Feeling it again, softening, back to the breath. And the more that you do that, eventually the mind that is all over the place, that wants to get somewhere else, starts to become pacified. And the ability to just be here in your own body with just your breath, or just being, becomes like honey. There's this subtle warmth and goodness and healthy, non-addictive pleasure that just comes from being alive. That if you were to try to describe this to me before I ever got into the practice, I would have said, that sounds like hocus pocus, or you're on drugs. But it's a reality. The potential of it is a reality. And there's a continuum of this. There are those that devote their entire lives to meditation, and they're meditating like I was in Burma every single day for decades. And they experience just a mind that is completely free and at ease and doesn't need anything. But it's very hard for them to function in the world because you have certain things you need to be attached to. And on the other end of it, you have people that are just constantly climbing the ladder, getting to the next thing. Once I get there, then I'll be happy. Wait, no, once I get there, wait, once I get there. And then there's never satiation. And so somewhere in that continuum, we can find ourselves. And there's a deeper freedom, a deeper peace, and a deeper fulfillment that comes as we move further along that continuum into this space of perhaps being more and more okay as we are with who we are. And I mean, at the heart of like what we're doing here is about freedom, right? And this is the ultimate freedom of mind, where you don't need something else to be fulfilled, or you need a significant amount less than you once did.
There's so much there. In particular, when you're talking about those vapid thoughts that come through your mind, like, oh, just have another cookie. Oh, go check your social media. This is the opposite of intentionality, right? This is when you're grazing through life and you're just let these fleeting thoughts dictate your response. You just get caught on this cycle that doesn't lead to an optimal outcome. And you can just see the threads. When you become mindful, you become aware of what are these thoughts actually doing? Where is this coming from? And is it because I'm just not content? And in my mind, I just visualize getting to a place where there's this very mild and, like you said, healthy, non-addictive, content euphoria that you feel that allows you to just analyze those thoughts and reject them out of hand when they're not adding value. But instead of it being like constant conflict where you're just saying no, 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 and then just eventually getting worn out and giving in, instead, you're just in this grounded space where you're content with yourself, and that completely changes the framework. And I'm saying this as someone that's not there. I struggle with this all day long, but I can see the exit ramp. I can see what the possibilities would be like if you could just get in front of this thing.
Yes, yes. And that's where like the actual work comes in, right? And it's even like you can get enamored and you can read all the blog posts and listen to all the podcasts and know everything you have to do. But until you actually implement it, none of it's actually going to come to fruition. And the practice of mindfulness, often many people sense an austerity around it and a huge commitment. And in the beginning, I'll admit it can be tough. But there's often this threshold that once you get past it, whether it's a couple weeks or a couple months, you really start to taste the goodness of it from the inside out. And one other thing I just want to comment on, Jonathan, which was, and you alluded to it, like often this feeling of like saying no, 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 no to all of this stuff. With mindfulness, we're bringing this quality of compassion and non-judgment to the experience. The reason I want to emphasize that is because I think a lot of people that have tried meditating, they've just experienced the tyranny and the aggravation and the abrasion of their own minds and their thoughts. And then they go, oh, there's no way I could do this. I hate being with myself. I hate being with my thoughts. And I try and clear my mind, but I can't get anywhere with it. Coming from the acknowledgement of like, listen, your mind is going to think. It is not going to stop thinking. In 4,000 hours of meditation in Burma, the longest I went without having a thought was like 48 seconds. So we can, and I'm not saying like I'm the paragon that you should aspire to, but given that amount of time, you might cut yourself a little bit of slack if you're working all day and then like you try and meditate for 10 minutes and your mind's thinking about what you had for lunch. Like it's what the brain does. So instead of saying no, we are saying like, oh, there goes the mind again. Oh, there's another thought. Oh, I'm beating myself up. Oh, I'm telling the story about why I'm not good enough or why I'm going to fail or everything I need to fix in my life. And we just like show some compassion. It's normal. You're a human being. This is what the mind does. But instead of getting sucked into it, we just notice it and we give it a little hug and then let it pass and then come back. And that's the quality of heart that we're bringing to this practice that I think is central to it.
And Cory, I love that about the non-judgment and just noticing that this is even happening. Most of us just kind of graze through life and don't even notice that our minds are going a million places at once. It just happens automatically. It's this automatic response. But I've noticed, and a word you use is practice. And I think that's important. You're not here saying, I'm perfect at this. I'm a Burmese monk and I can meditate without thought for 10 hours straight. You kind of jokingly said 48 seconds is the longest time you had without a thought. I find the same thing when I meditate. Often I try to do it every morning. I would say 5 to 6 mornings a week and just 10 or 15 minutes. But it's not about, to me, it's not at least about clearing my mind entirely. It's about, I know my mind is going to think. but then I make a note of that thought and then just return to the breath. And just the ability to do that, I find benefit throughout my entire day. When you have those normal impulses to, oh, I'm just going to check Facebook real quick. Normally that would happen reflexively, but I actually now have the thought and I'm able to put that space between stimulus and response, like we've talked about with Dominic and ad nauseum here on the podcast. When you can notice that space, you at least then have the option to change it as opposed to just reflexively doing it. So I personally have found just profound benefits just by being able to notice my thoughts.
Yeah. And just to highlight that again, I know the stimulus and response has been mentioned multiple times, but I'll just reiterate that quote, which is the Viktor Frankl quote: between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. With the FI mentality in mind, if we're able to notice the longing for something or feeling like I need that to find some sort of fulfillment, you can see how easy it would be to fall into all those different, with all the stimulation that we have in our culture right now. If we're not paying attention, if we're not monitoring that, and if we're not connected deeply to what's most important to us, so easily can we get swept away by it. But if we are able to notice, oh, look at that. There's that new book that I really want to buy on Amazon. I could probably get it at the library, but I want it right now. And we feel the tension in the body. We feel our hand on the mouse. We're about to click it. If we can feel all of that, watch all of that, and be grounded in it, there's also the capacity to soften around it and then use more of our prefrontal cortex, which allows us to think a bit more meaningfully rather than acting out of emotion. And say maybe there's a better response rather than the impulse or the instinct right here.
Cory, I love that you're in this community. I love the diversity of your particular experience. It's unlike anybody that we brought on the show up to this point. And I think there's so much value here for our audience. I mean, my mind was just reeling as you're kind of putting together all these pieces that Brad and I have been talking about. But honestly, it still hasn't totally crystallized. I'm still grappling with these concepts. One of the biggest dilemmas that I hear people talking about is trying to figure out, but what comes next? What comes after you reach FI? And I know we're all on this path together. In your mind, what does your life look like once you've reached financial independence and you're on the other side? Does life change? Are you doing the same thing? And is there any advice that you could give to our audiences grappling with this really maybe even more important dilemma of what comes next?
Yeah, so I'm not at FI yet, but I think about it often, and it could be within the next 5 years or something along that time frame. What I've been fortunate enough with is that I love what I get to do, and I was very intentional early on in designing a profession around what I love, but it was also very honest with myself that things that I've loved have shifted and priorities have shifted. And I wanted to be able to get, one of the reasons FI was so important to me is like when I would eventually start a family, I wanted to be able to have the freedom to engage in my life the way that I wanted without feeling like I needed to teach. And one of the things that's been interesting is most of my programs are fee-based programs, whether it's like a retreat or a workshop, but I do run this donation-based group on Long Island every Tuesday night. I don't see any of that. All the donations go to a scholarship fund to help people attend another retreat or something like that. But I find that I get actually some of the most joy running that workshop, running that class. And there's something about being able to do what I love without money associated with it that enriches the joy for me. That's been very interesting for me to see. So life after FI, I'm sure I'm still going to be doing work and speaking engagements and stuff that's paid, but I really want to move into communities that wouldn't typically have access to this work and be able to teach just from a pure place of giving without anything in return. And then devoting more time to my practice. I devote a lot of time to my meditation practice right now, but I've seen so clearly the fulfillment and happiness that comes from this. And I want to be able to craft my day around that and just whatever I'm passionate about, whether it's reading, learning, understanding more about meditation, how to teach it in the best way possible. But there's a different kind of joy and freedom that comes when it doesn't have to be attached to money. And that's what I'm so excited about. So for anyone that maybe fears, like, what's next? these are the people that I'm working with all the time. It's the people that like I had my kids, and then I had 4 of them, and they all graduated, and I was a mother or father, and that was my identity. And now they've all grown up and they moved out of the house, and like, I don't know what's next. What is my identity now? Where do I go? And there are so many things that you can do, tangible things that you could get into, interests you could get into. But I would encourage everyone to really explore the potential of the mind and the potential of befriending yourself on a very deep level, perhaps for the first time in your life, and seeing what is it like for me to learn who am I actually? What is it I actually need? And can I find some deep fulfillment and contentment without just immediately having to get to the next thing or cultivate the next passion? All of that is great, and my life is like all about passion and interest, but there's also a foundation that I've developed for myself that was very important, which is that I know even if those things weren't there, I wouldn't be broken. And there's a deep quality of contentment that is here in just being with myself. And I wish that gift on anyone.
Cory, that's really profound. And I'm curious, for someone like that who has never really delved into their own mind, how would you suggest people get started with meditation and mindfulness? How much time, if there is even such a thing, like a correct amount of time that people should put in, kind of tongue in cheek there, obviously. What does that practice look like for someone who comes to you and says, or who's listening to this podcast and says, wow, this is fascinating, but where do I go from here?
Yeah. So this is the $1 million question. And this is what my passion is, and how do we actually put this into practice. And so one thing I'll mention in a little bit is an opportunity for any listeners to get a bunch of my follow-up resources for free that include guided meditations and all app recommendations. But in terms of like time frame and commitment, the latest neuroscience suggests that if we want to get the structural changes in the brain, where the parts of the brain responsible for stress, anxiety, depression, rumination, where those areas actually start to shrink, and areas responsible for joy, empathy, compassion, those areas start to grow, we need a minimum of about 8 minutes of meditation a day. Now, take all of that with a grain of salt, because like a year ago it was 9 minutes and now it's 8 minutes. So who knows? Science is this constantly evolving thing. But the latest says about 8 minutes a day is what can get us these structural shifts in the brain. So if somebody was looking for something to start with, that's what I would suggest. I would say just commit to 8 minutes a day. You can set a timer for yourself. And on the most basic level, you could just sit down, put your hand on your abdomen, and just feel your breath moment after moment. It's a beautiful thing because it's so simple. Like once you actually get it, you can consistently do it. There are going to be a lot of questions that come up along the way, which is where books come in and teachers come in, and all of that stuff is important. But to start, just sit down, put your hand on your belly, set a timer for 8 minutes, see if you can feel each breath fully. You don't have to deepen it in any particular way, just breathe normally. When the mind wanders, you just gently notice and just go, all right, the mind is thinking, and then gently come back to the breath over and over and over again. So that, on the most basic level, anyone can do, and you can do it sitting in your car while your car is parked, of course. You could do it while you're lying in bed. You could do it before you go to work. So if that still feels daunting, though, and the idea of like 8 minutes, like you don't know my life, Cory, I don't have 8 minutes. One, I would challenge that and just see like where you may be spending 8 minutes in places you shouldn't be, and where is it on TV or the phone or whatever. But if it's truly that, then I say start with 1 minute. And the great thing about 1 minute is it's very hard to argue yourself out of 1 minute. If you start saying you don't have 1 minute, we really got to evaluate some things going on in your life. So everyone could find 1 minute, even if it's 1 extra minute in the bathroom. Start with 1 minute. If 1 minute turns to 2, 2 turns to 3, 3 turns to 4, that's great. But if it's just 1 minute, that's awesome. But typically what happens, you get to the end of 1 minute, then the mind goes, you know what? I kind of like this. I'll do 2. Then you do 2. The mind goes, this is important. Then I'll do 3. And so you start arguing yourself into the meditation rather than arguing yourself out. And it's important because it leverages autonomy, which is very important for behavior change. So a lot of the times we are arguing ourselves out of the meditation. And I say 90% of starting the meditation practice is just getting your butt on the cushion or the chair. And by committing to 1 minute, that just reduces high barriers to entry. But if people wanted more structure, I have a ton of resources, including like 10 guided meditations, a 7-page mindfulness starter kit with book recommendations, app recommendations, tips, hints, strategies. And so the best way I have to disseminate that, you can text your email address to this number, and the number is 631-759-8601. 631-759-8601. If you text your email address to that, you'll get an email to your inbox in about 30 seconds, and it'll have all of these resources for you. And it's designed specifically so that you could go as deep as you want into it. If you're looking for a basic app, I teach on an app called Simple Habit, and it's 5-minute meditations for busy people. There are free meditations on there, and then there's a paid version. But there's also an app called Insight Timer, and that's probably the cheapest meditation app that's out there. A lot of great meditations. You could just set a timer. You could listen to a guided meditation. The paid version might be like $3 or so. But those are all good resources, and all of that will be in the follow-up resources that you get.
Awesome. And for those of you that are like, I can't remember more than 6 numbers, it'll be in the show notes. Now, this probably has blown some people's minds, and some people are thinking, I love this, but I have a follow-up question. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
I am pretty engaged with social media lately. My 2 main platforms are Instagram and Facebook. You can find me on those at Cory Muscara for each of them. My professional page is on Facebook. I live stream videos, and I write this post every morning called Coffee with Cory. So if nothing else, like, there's a ton of free content that I put out there. It's like a mini blog post every day. And it's just reinforcing these ideas through different perspectives. So I'd love to see you over there, and I interact with everyone that comments. So let me know that you listened, and I'll get back to you. It'd be great to see you.
My favorite line of the day, leverage your autonomy. I'm going to use it. I don't even know how I'm going to use it yet, but I'm going to figure it out.
That's great. And Cory, those blog posts are on both Facebook. Is that Facebook and Instagram, or where do you post those?
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. And then if you want the daily email to your inbox, that'll be in the follow-up link as well. Follow-up email, you can get a link to that if you want to subscribe.
Wonderful. That's really, really cool. And yeah, I love that point about starting with 1 minute. Because it's really hard to talk yourself out of, I don't have 1 minute. But I find myself that I sometimes use the Headspace app and Calm, which I guess are 2 of the bigger apps. And you have to generally pick the number of minutes from the outset of the practice. And, I'll usually do 10 or 15, but I'll find myself, when they're getting ready to close up, thinking, I'm nowhere near done, and I have to sit through them telling you to wiggle your toes and wiggle your fingers and come back to your body when I don't really want to be at that point. So I know personally, if I didn't have the timer, and I think that's probably the next step for me, is to just do it on my own at this point, because, I do understand the practice to that level. But yeah, that definitely hit home to me. So I would advise everyone, start with that 1 minute. And when you focus on your breath, you're just going to feel great about yourself. I find it just relaxes me instantly. My head is clear, and I just find those add-on benefits all day. So start with 1 minute, and who knows where you stop. And that's a pretty cool way to think about the practice.
Cory, we should make an app together called 1 Minute Meditations. It's probably already there. And then what we do at the end of the 1 minute, it has a do you want to continue button. It just completely flips it on its head. Maybe we should just call it Leverage Your Autonomy and sell it on the App Store for $1.99.
So Dan Harris, I went on his podcast, Dan Harris's 10% Happier podcast, talked about the 1 minute thing, and then they put it into their 10% Happier app, and they're called extendable meditation. So after 1 minute, you can keep going.
Of course. I should have thought to get the patent. Dagnabbit.
Yeah.
I'm going to give myself a hug and move on. Are you ready for the hot seat, Cory?
Let's do it.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the Choose FI Hot Seat.
All right, Cory, question number 1, your favorite blog that's not your own?
I haven't been actively involved with blogs in probably the last couple of years, but because I'm more into audio now, saves time. But I would have to say it was Money Mustache and then Mark Manson. I consumed both of those fully.
And Cory, so the natural next question is, what are your favorite podcasts, if that's the type of audio that you're consuming generally?
Well, that's not that's not the natural next question. Mine is, tell us about Mark Madsen. Tell us about his content.
All right. Well, then get to my question.
He just wrote the subtle art of not giving the F word. He says it more easily than I don't know how much we can say that here, but his book is great. He wrote a book on relationships called Models a while back. He just writes on human psychology in a very practical, down-to-earth, but also evidence-based way. I think his content's great. He's not coming out with as many blogs these days because he's just become a lot bigger, and I think he's more focusing on books. But Mark Manson's work, coupled with Mr. Money Mustache, it was just like pouring gasoline on fire when it comes to personal development. It was phenomenal.
Very, very cool. All right, you can answer Brad's question now.
Yeah. A podcast right now. I am, Tim Ferriss, I was following him for a while. I follow you guys. I'm getting into Gary Vaynerchuk, just because from an entrepreneurial perspective, I think he's a magician when it comes to predicting trends and understanding trends. So I like looking at his perspectives on social media.
I heard, and I could be wrong, that you tried and failed to teach him meditation.
This is true. Oh. So Dan Harris brought me back on his podcast when Gary came on, and I did teach Gary meditation. I'm one of 2 people that have taught Gary meditation. Failed. But we only had 3 minutes. I think if I had a longer chunk of time, we can make it happen. But that guy, he's so in his zone, and in his words, his hardware is just like already to him perfect, and he doesn't want to do anything to mess it up. And then I could get on board with that argument. So yeah, it was very interesting teaching Gary meditation.
Very nice. All right, well, let's go ahead and zone in on this. How about your favorite article of all time? This could be one that you wrote or somebody else's. And honestly, if you feel like it's better served for a specific podcast episode, that's fine too. Your favorite article of all time. Yeah,
there's this article that was an interview with this psychologist named John Wellwood. It's called Human Nature, Buddha Nature, and it's on this topic called spiritual bypassing. I'm not sure how much this community would enjoy it, but the whole premise of it was that oftentimes when we think of like spirituality or personal development, there's often like the idea of where we're trying to get. Like, I want to be that calm person or that super peaceful person or that super happy person. And then we end up bypassing the negative emotions. We try and rise above the raw messiness of what it actually means to be a human being. And we end up like suppressing those real parts of ourselves that just lead to all these other negative things and anger that never gets addressed, or this false niceness, or the people that are just smiling all the time, but deep down they're like dying on the inside. So I freaking love that article. It's called Human Nature, Buddha Nature.
Wow, we're definitely going to link to that in the show notes. And Cory, frankly, I'm going to read that the second we get off the recording here. So that sounds amazing.
Awesome.
All right. Your favorite life hack. I assume this may or may not be meditation, but
it's actually not. Meditation I see as like my long-term life hack. But when I think of life hack, I'm thinking of like shorter things I could do throughout the day. And it kind of ties into meditation. I'll give you an intangible and a tangible. The intangible is gratitude. I think this as a life hack for happiness, or life hack for just the mind and well-being. When you shift your mindset to what am I grateful for, and you just start asking that question, you can go from this place of like misery or just everything that's wrong, everything I need to fix, to, oh, wow, I'm sitting in a bathroom and there's toilet paper right now. You know what? That makes me pretty happy. Or what about that last time there wasn't toilet paper here and I was miserable?
It was awkward for everybody.
It was awkward for everyone. And so like the gratitude can grow from just like one moment of that. And the shift in perspective, I think, is much more powerful than people give credit. And there's a lot of research on the benefits of gratitude, and very easy to do. It just starts with, what could I be grateful for right now? And then the other life hack is just scheduling out my day the day before, just lets everything fall into place. That's my big keystone habit, where I do that. And then the gym falls in place, meditation falls in place, getting emails done, and everything else I want to do falls in place.
What does that scheduling look like? How precise are you getting it? Do you leave empty hours for potential things that come up? What does that look like on a granular level?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of structuring unstructured time, meaning blocking out times that have no structure to it at all. On a granular level, I use the app Workflowy. It's a desktop app, And it's a great way to just organize, like, what are your to-dos and what are the different elements of each of those to-dos. So I have that broken down from Monday to Sunday, the things that need to get done each of those days. I'll spend like one day of the week putting it all into that. And then I have a paper planner that I put together that basically has every single day broken down into half-hour intervals from like 3 a.m., because sometimes I wake up super early, all the way down to 10 p.m. And then like the day before, I say the first 4 hours are the most important hours for me. Those are the ones I will always schedule out, just so I know when I wake up, this is what I'm doing. Because if I don't do that, then I'm going to probably go on my phone and check social media and all this stuff. So I don't meditate first thing in the morning. I do like my big thing first thing in the morning that I'm working on. I schedule that out. And then I always leave time open, usually around lunch and late evening, just for decompressing or anything else that could come up. And of course, it shifts at times, so it's always good to have some wiggle room there. But I love sketching out, like, what am I going to do, when to do it? And it changes, but just having that structure in the mind allows me to get like 3 times as much done. Yeah. And just like one thing I want to add to that is not only get things done, but there's a freedom that I don't have to think about everything else that I'm doing or that needs to get done. I kind of delegate that to a piece of paper. And now I could be fully present for whatever it is I'm doing, knowing that this time has been allocated for this. And then in the next hour, I'll be doing this and then this. And there's a real piece that comes from that.
I had 2 questions. One is, you're a pretty connected guy in terms of, I'm sure you have a lot of communication, a lot of emails you have to respond to, social media, just a lot of this very important stuff, quote unquote. Do you set up like a time at which you won't check your phone for the first time of the day until, or is it you just try to get your one big thing done? Any little actionable tips there?
Yeah, in the morning, I'll keep my phone on airplane mode, usually until I get that one big thing done. By 7 a.m. Eastern time, I have to go on it, just because that's when I post my Coffee with Cory posts on Instagram and social medias. But yeah, usually those first few hours, it's in airplane mode. And then there are apps like Forest, which are great, that will bring up a screen and it'll grow a little plant. And if you at any time exit out of that screen, your plant dies. So you don't want to kill the plant. And that just is a way to prevent going on like Instagram, Facebook. And since I'm heavily involved in social media, like for my work, that ends up being very compelling to me. So apps like that are just saying, all right, I'm taking an hour. I have self-control on my computer, my desktop, which is an app that blocks other apps, and then I use Forest on my phone to make sure everything's aside. And then I give myself full permission in the other hours to go on my phone, so that it doesn't feel like this constant form of oppression against technology.
I guarantee you Brad's going to have both those installed by the beginning of next week. He is all about batch processing.
Yeah. It's amazing how well it works. And, you know, I find myself doing it from time to time, and I just need to be more vigilant about it, frankly. Like my wife, Laura, knew that I was constantly anxious about all the emails I get. And we have our Choose FI inbox. I have my personal inbox, et cetera, et cetera. And invariably I'd be sitting at the computer, quote unquote, working or writing emails or being on Facebook or whatever it may be. You know, there are all these people contacting me, but it wound up just being those little dopamine hits. And like anytime a notification would come through on Facebook, I would go and check over to it. And I didn't realize how unproductive I was until Laura basically said, sit down for 1 hour, put a timer on, open nothing else but your 2 email inboxes, and see how much you can get through, just as like a game, right? And I literally cleared both of them down to 0. And it was amazing. It was 1 hour. I would have had that anxiety hanging over me forever, basically, because it just was there constantly. And it was because I was being stupid and I wasn't being productive. So that batch processing, it's like literally, Cory, this week, that has hit home to me of just how important it is.
That's all. And there's a book by Cal Newport called Deep Work. It's probably my favorite book that I've gifted the most. And of the 12 people I've given it to, 7 have said this has been life-changing. And it's all about how we have this attention residue that we carry with us into different tasks based on what we were doing beforehand. And to do like really deep, creative or meaningful or just productive work, we need to be fully in whatever we're doing. And we often need longer chunks of time to do that rather than switching every 5 minutes to email, then Facebook, to conversation, to call, whatever it is. That book is phenomenal. I highly recommend it as a plug for everything you just said.
Well, if the title of this episode wasn't already guaranteed to have the word mindfulness in it, it'd probably have productivity somewhere in there because, man, we're crushing the productivity hacks right here. This is awesome.
Good.
I was going to try not to orphan number 2, and I was basically just going to carve out and say, if you're setting up the specific unstructured time, which I think there's real value there because you're basically giving yourself permission to follow your natural instincts in the confines of something that won't ruin the rest of your day. I was curious how much time you actually give yourself. Do you have maybe a short answer there?
Well, so I'm hesitant to say this, but I recently upped my meditation practice to 3 hours a day, which is a huge chunk of time. And I never suggest anyone, unless they really want to do it. Having done that, a lot of my unstructured time now goes to meditation, which I kind of put in the same category, kind of. So I would say, devoting an hour or longer. It depends on the person and what do you feel like you need to breathe throughout your day. And so with the added meditation, that usually fills in those spaces now.
Cool. All right. Question number 4, your biggest financial mistake that you've made.
My senior year, I was always really into selling things. Like they called me the candy man in high school because I monopolized the candy selling business and would buy $150 worth of candy from Costco every day and then unload it for like $400 in cafeteria. So that was like a natural instinct for me. And when I got a bunch of graduation money right after I graduated high school, I said, what can I put this in and try and capitalize on it? I think I had like $3,000 or something. I bought a bunch of golf belts because I was like a competitive golfer at the time and I loved belts. And I was like, oh my God, if I love belts, everyone else is going to love belts. So I found this retail guy in California. The whole thing just felt sketchy for some reason, but I put like $3,000 into belts. And he's like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, you don't need to know that. I don't even know why it was. I was just going to sell them. But for some reason, it was 18. I was like, I shouldn't be doing this. So I still have 50 belts that are in my parents' basement somewhere that never got unloaded. I completely wasted my $3,000 of graduation money. That is still the worst financial mistake.
All right, guys, we're going to have a link to the eBay store where Cory is currently trying to sell these vintage 1998. You do not want to miss this.
I'll pay you.
Oh, that's great. All right, Cory, other than not buying these belts, what would be the advice you'd give your younger self?
Other than invest in Bitcoin, I would say if I would have a conversation with my younger self, I think I would tell my younger self that there's a lot of things I could tell you right now, but I don't think you're ready to hear it. Just keep trusting the process because there's a maturation of mind that happens organically and hindsight is always 20/20. But if we had that insight in the moment, we would have used it. I think there's a reason why there needs to be this maturation. And if an older version of myself came to my younger self, I tell my younger self to not listen to him because he might screw some things up. That might be a cop-out answer, but it's really just to remind him to trust the process, keep listening, cultivate your heart, and follow what feels right in this moment because that's all you can do.
Okay, well, we do have a bonus question for you. What the essence of this question is we spend a lot of time talking about not buying stuff and placing a value on very intentional living. But the reality is all of us do buy stuff. And we think that's an interesting part of your story. So we would love for you to share with us your favorite purchase made on Amazon.com last year, or if you don't have anything good there, just your favorite purchase made in general.
Amazon. Well, I'm a big fan of standing desks. I have a standing desk at home. Most of the work that I do is standing, and I travel a ton. So I was so used to using cardboard boxes or a plant vase and putting my laptop on that. And I finally found this portable standing desk on Amazon. It's called Executive Solutions or something. And it is awesome. It folds up. I could put it in a suitcase. I could sometimes put it in a backpack if it's a big backpack. And I travel around the world with this thing. And it allows me to not have to sit for extended periods of time when I'm doing work outside of the country or outside of New York. So that I am very passionate about. My portable standing desk.
Brad, I think you guys have similar taste.
Yeah, really. No, I'm a big fan of standing desks, but sadly, I do not use mine nearly as often as I should. And I'm sure my wife Laura is cackling as she's listening to this now. But yeah, that's really cool. There's also one I found. Oh wow, I just Googled that. It looks to be only about $60 some odd actually, which is really cool. Yeah, the Executive Office's Solution Portable Desk. I came across one cardboard one. I think it's called Ori stand, ORI stand. It's like $20 or $30 and yeah, fairly portable. But yeah, yours looks significantly more heavy duty. So that's very cool.
The cardboard ones fascinate me though. The ones that can like fold up almost to like the size of a sheet of paper. I haven't seen any that I've trusted yet, but that could have changed. So yeah, and they're probably a lot lighter. Yeah.
Very cool.
Cory, this was a lot of fun. I have a feeling, our audience didn't know what to expect, but I think there's real value here. I think this is one that people are going to be listening to multiple times. And just from Brad and myself, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story with us. This has been an absolute blast.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you. You're doing awesome work, and it was such a pleasure to be here.
Man, this was a fun episode. So many actionable tips and takeaways on this episode. I'm sure you're going to be downloading apps for a couple days. Definitely reach out to Cory. The phone number that he listed is going to be in the show notes for today's episode. If you want to get access to some of the free resources that he mentioned, very, very cool stuff. To our audience, I hope you're getting value from the show. I hope you're getting value from everything that we're trying to put together for you. I hope that this really is a one-stop shop for just what is that next thing that you can do? What is that next thing, that next piece of action that you can take, that you can put into your life, and the aggregation of those compounded gains radically transform the life that you live into. I know that that is kind of my goal for myself as we talk to these guests and we start incorporating this stuff. So I hope you're getting value as well. If you'd like to support us in what we're doing here at Choose FI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.